This is The Download from Sounds Profitable, your daily source for the essential news in the business of podcasting. I'm Gavin Gaddis. Here's what you need to know for today, Tuesday, May 6th. First up, Swedish podcast conglomerate PodX acquires Lemonada Media for around $30 million. PodX's acquisition of Lemonada Media marks the conglomerate's first move into the United States podcasting space. Since forming in 2022, PodX has largely focused on acquiring audio companies and podcasts in Europe and the UK, including the recent supergroup created by merging Goldhawk Productions and Listen Entertainment into Platform Media. PodX CEO Patrick Svensk told Bloomberg the Lemonada acquisition is both motivated by their love for Lemonada's work, as well as building, quote, the Atlantic link, end quote. Next up, Patreon will update its iPhone app to sidestep Apple's payment system. Last week, the judge in the long-running Epic v. Apple case, I'm providing a link to that article as well, made a final ruling that Apple is no longer allowed to collect fees on purchases made outside of apps. More importantly, the ruling also bars Apple from preventing companies from directing app users to off-app places where they can make purchases. Two facets that have deeply shaped how companies carry themselves in their apps, from Patreon actively discouraging users from pledging in the iOS app, to Spotify reworking their planned audiobook integration years ago. Now, several companies are getting ready for their workarounds. Patreon, for example, is planning to submit an iOS update that will allow creators to accept payments outside of Apple's payment system, avoiding the 30% platform fee. Andy Yen, CEO of VPN company Proton, says they are gearing up iOS changes that will lower prices previously set in accordance with that 30% fee. Next up, Spotify now shows how many times people listen to podcast episodes. This morning, Spotify debuted a new metric, simply called plays, that is public-facing on individual podcast episodes, the homepage for that podcast, and the overall show page. This marks one of the few times an audience engagement metric has been public-facing in podcasting, with other notable examples being Apple Podcast reviews and the YouTube Viewcount. Similarly to YouTube views, the new plays on Spotify will appear underneath a podcast episode's artwork or video feed, in line with the publication date and episode length. Finally, it's Q1 report season. It's that time of the 4 times a year again. First up, I've got Acast showing their net sales grew 30% in Q1 with a gross margin of 37% and an adjusted EBITDA margin of negative 1% or minus 1%, not negative. I'm reading math today. Meanwhile, as Pod News reported earlier this week, SiriusXM's Q1 shows revenue for Pandora and off-platform income is down 2% year over year. But if you break it down to just podcast revenue, that specifically grew 33% year over year. And finally, Apple's Q1 earnings call dropped the tidbit that Apple Services, which is the section of Apple in which Apple Podcast lives, reached an all-time revenue record of $26.6 billion. As for the rest of the news, Westwood One's Pierre Bouvard has a new piece covering several studies looking at how radio, podcast, and streaming audio ads could power movie launches and streaming video subscriptions. The wait is over. Today, the IAS, Integral Ad Sciences, announced their AI-driven brand safety and suitability solution for podcast ads on Spotify Audience Network is now live, a collaboration that's been in the works since an initial IAS brand safety announcement back in 2022. Forever Dog has 3 new hires across their business, operations, and production areas, namely Kristen Myers, formerly of Stitcher, is head of business development. Oscar Guido, formerly of Treefort, is now strategic operations advisor. And Harry Nelson, late of Hyperobject Industries, is now producer of the podcast How Was Your Week? BetterHelp, one of podcasting's biggest advertisers for years, has launched their own podcast called Mind If We Talk, in which a licensed therapist fosters discussions of mental health topics. Mary Llewellyn, formerly of Dear Media, has teamed up with podcasting expert Michaela Phillips to launch Pursuit Network, a woman-founded creator-first media company. Signal Hill Insights will be adding video podcast metrics to the upcoming edition of the Canadian Podcast Listener, an annual report from the company that is set to debut in November. Discounted pricing to get in on that is available through the end of May. And finally, Adopter Media's Adam McNeil has a new LinkedIn post about making podcast ad buying as easy as 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, with an infographic describing 5 levels of vetting if a podcast is right for your campaign. Be sure to check out the link to every article mentioned right in your podcast listening app or at soundsprofitable.com, where you can also subscribe to the newsletter version. The download is written and produced by Brian Barletta, myself, and Tom Webster. For Sounds Profitable, I'm Gavin Gaddis. Download us again tomorrow.